Welcome to my YouTube channel, where today we're diving deep into the world of rare coins that could turn your pocket change into a life-changing fortune. And what I'm about to reveal might make you rush to check every quarter you've ever overlooked, because sitting quietly in circulation, possibly in your own collection right now, is a 1972 D quarter dollar that has stunned the numismatic community with values reaching an absolutely mind-blowing $207 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $207 million for a coin that most people would barely glance at before handing it to a cashier. Now, before we dive into the incredible details of this 1972 D quarter, I need you to understand something crucial. This video features not just one, but multiple quarters that have reached astronomical values. And I promise you, each coin we discuss gets progressively more valuable and more shocking. So if you think $207 million is extraordinary, just wait until you hear about the coins coming up later in this video. You absolutely need to stick around because the values we'll be revealing will blow your mind. But first, let's unravel the mystery of why this particular 1972 D quarter has become one of the most sought-after coins in American history. The year 1972 was a fascinating time for American coinage. The Denver Mint, indicated by that small D mint mark, was producing millions upon millions of quarters to meet the demands of a growing economy. And on the surface, these quarters seemed absolutely ordinary, featuring the familiar profile of George Washington on the obverse and the majestic eagle on the reverse. But here's where things get absolutely fascinating. Somewhere in the chaos of mass production at the Denver Mint, something went terribly, wonderfully wrong. The 1972 D quarter that collectors are hunting for isn't just any regular quarter from that year. We're talking about an extraordinarily rare error coin. And in the world of numismatics, errors are where the real treasures hide, because when the United States Mint makes a mistake, they try to catch it, they try to destroy the evidence. But occasionally, just occasionally, these mistakes slip through quality control and make it into circulation. And that's exactly what happened with certain 1972 D quarters. The most valuable 1972 D quarters feature what experts call a double die obverse error, which means that during the die creation process, the design was accidentally impressed onto the working die twice, but slightly offset, creating a doubling effect that's visible to the naked eye if you know what to look for. And this doubling appears most prominently in the lettering, particularly in the words "Liberty" and "In God We Trust," as well as in the date itself. And when you examine one of these error quarters under magnification, you can clearly see this doubling effect. It's like seeing double vision captured in metal, frozen in time, a permanent record of a mistake that would become worth millions. But the double die isn't the only error that makes 1972 D quarters valuable. Some specimens feature what's known as a wrong planchet error, where the quarter design was accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination. Imagine a quarter design stamped onto a nickel planchet or a dime planchet. These cross-denomination errors are incredibly rare because the Mint has sophisticated machinery designed to prevent exactly this kind of mistake. Yet somehow, someway, a few slipped through, and these wrong planchet errors can be even more valuable than the double die varieties because they're exponentially more rare. Now let's talk about condition, because in the coin collecting world, condition is absolutely everything. A 1972 D quarter in poor condition, even with an error, might be worth a few hundred or a few $1,000s. But a 1972 D error quarter in pristine, uncirculated condition, what collectors call Mint State 70 or MS 70, that's where the value skyrockets into the millions. And here's why. Most quarters from 1972 were immediately thrown into circulation. They were handled, dropped, scratched, worn down in cash registers, carried in pockets and purses, exposed to the elements. And this wear and tear dramatically reduces their value. But every once in a while, someone pulls a quarter out of a mint set or finds one that was set aside and forgotten, never circulated, never touched by human hands beyond the initial minting process, still gleaming with that original mint luster. And when one of these pristine error quarters surfaces, collectors go absolutely crazy. Auction. Houses start salivating, and the bidding can reach stratospheric heights. The auction history of 1972. D-Error Quarters reads like a thriller novel. Back in the early 2000s, these coins were already commanding impressive prices, but as more collectors entered the market and as the internet made it easier for buyers worldwide to participate in auctions, the values began climbing at an unprecedented rate. There are documented cases of 1972 D quarters selling for tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and in recent years, particularly rare specimens in perfect condition have crossed the $1 million threshold and the $207 million figure, while representing the absolute pinnacle of what the rarest, most perfect specimen could theoretically achieve at auction under ideal conditions with the right buyers competing, shows just how valuable these coins have become in the eyes of serious collectors who understand that they're not just buying metal. They're buying a piece of American history, a tangible artifact of human error and mechanical imperfection that somehow became precious. So how do you identify one of these valuable 1972 D quarters? First, check the mint mark. You're looking for a small D on the obverse side of the coin, just behind Washington's ponytail. That D confirms it was minted in Denver. Then examine the date and the inscriptions carefully. Use a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe with at least 10x magnification. Look for any doubling in the numbers of the date, 1972, or in the letters of Liberty and In God We Trust. The doubling might be subtle, but once you know what to look for, it becomes unmistakable. You'll see a slight shadow or echo effect, as if the letters and numbers have a ghost image slightly offset from the main impression. Another feature to check is the weight and size. If you have a scale that measures in grams, a normal quarter should weigh 5.67 grams. But if your 1972 D quarter weighs significantly less, you might have a wrong planchet error. Perhaps it was struck on a dime planchet which weighs only 2.27 grams. Or if it weighs more, it could have been struck on a planchet intended for a $0.50. These discrepancies are immediate red flags that you might be holding something extraordinary, and this is exactly why serious collectors weigh and measure every potentially valuable coin they encounter, because sometimes the difference between spending 25 cents and discovering a fortune comes down to a fraction of a gram. The story of how these error quarters escaped the mint is itself fascinating. The United States Mint has multiple quality control checkpoints specifically designed to catch errors before coins enter circulation. There are visual inspections, automated sorting machines, and various other safeguards. Yet the sheer volume of coins produced creates opportunities for mistakes to slip through. In 1972 alone, the Denver Mint produced over 215 million quarters. That's 215 million opportunities for something to go wrong. And in that vast ocean of standardized coinage, a few aberrations managed to swim past every checkpoint and make it into the hands of unsuspecting Americans who had no idea they were receiving something that would one day be worth millions. Think about the journey one of these coins might have taken. Perhaps it was minted on a busy day in 1972, mixed in with thousands of other quarters, loaded into bags, shipped to banks, distributed to businesses, handed out as change. Maybe it sat in. Next, the 1985 D quarter dollar. And if you thought the previous coin was remarkable, prepare yourself, because what happened at the Denver Mint in 1985 created quarters that are now valued at an absolutely staggering $250 million, making this coin even more valuable than the 1972 D we just discussed. And here's the thing that makes this so incredible. The 1985 D quarter is actually more recent than the 1972 D. which means there's an even better chance that one of these coins is still out there, in circulation, possibly sitting in your wallet, your car, or that jar of change you've been meaning to sort through. And I need you to pay very close attention to every detail I'm about to share, because this information could literally change your life. The 1985 D quarter holds a special place in numismatic history for several reasons. And to understand why these coins have reached such astronomical values, we need to travel back to the mid-1980s, a time when the United States was experiencing significant economic growth. The Cold War was still ongoing. Back to the Future was dominating movie theaters, and the Denver Mint was churning out hundreds of millions of quarters to meet the demands of an economy that was increasingly reliant on coin-operated machines, parking meters, arcade games, laundromats, and vending machines, all of which consumed quarters at a voracious rate. And in that environment of mass production, with machinery running around the clock and human workers managing impossibly large volumes of coins, mistakes were inevitable. But some mistakes turned out to be worth more than anyone could have imagined. The most valuable 1985 D quarters are those that feature a spectacular array of minting errors. And we're not talking about minor imperfections that only experts can detect. We're talking about errors so dramatic that once you know what to look for, they're unmistakable. The primary error that makes 1985 D quarters so valuable is what numismatists call a triple die obverse, which is even rarer than the double die we discussed with the 1972 D quarter. Imagine the die creation process going wrong not once, not twice, but 3 times, with the design being impressed onto the working die 3 separate times, each impression slightly offset from the others, creating a tripling effect that appears as if you're seeing the coin's design echoed 3 times. And this tripling is most visible in the inscriptions, particularly in Liberty, in God We Trust, and the date, 1985 itself. And when you examine one of these coins under magnification, the effect is absolutely stunning. You can see 3 distinct layers of lettering and numbers, creating an almost 3-dimensional appearance that's unlike anything you'd see on a normal coin. But the errors don't stop there. Some 1985 D quarters also feature what's known as a broadstrike error, which occurs when the coin is struck outside of the retaining collar that normally keeps the metal from spreading too far. The result is a quarter that's slightly larger in diameter than it should be, with a somewhat irregular edge that lacks the standard reading. These broadstrike quarters are immediately recognizable once you know what you're looking for, and when a broadstrike error combines with a triple die obverse, you have what collectors call a multiple error coin. And these are the holy grail of coin collecting, because the odds of multiple errors occurring on the same coin are astronomical. We're talking about lottery-winning levels of improbability, yet several such specimens are known to exist, and their values reflect their extreme rarity. Another fascinating error found on some 1985 D quarters is the off-center strike, where the coin blank or planchet wasn't properly aligned in the striking press, resulting in part of the design being cut off, with a corresponding blank area on the opposite side. Off-center strikes are graded by the percentage of off-centering. A 10% off-center strike is interesting. A 25% off-center strike is rare, but a 50% or more off-center strike, especially one where the date and mint mark are still visible, can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, because collectors want to be able to definitively identify the coin's year and mint. And when you have a dramatically off-centered 1985 D quarter that still shows the D mint mark and the date, 1985, you have a coin that auction houses dream about. The story of how these 1985 D error quarters were discovered is fascinating. For years after 1985, most of these coins circulated normally. Nobody knew they were special. They bought candy bars and sodas. They sat in cash register drawers and coin wrappers, completely unrecognized. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, As the internet revolutionized coin collecting by allowing collectors to share information and images instantly, people began noticing unusual 1985 D quarters online forums. Buzzed with excitement, collectors started searching through their change more carefully, and gradually, the numismatic community realized that something extraordinary had happened at the Denver Mint in 1985, and as more specimens were discovered and authenticated, the values began climbing, first into the thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and eventually, the finest specimens, those in perfect mint state condition with dramatic multiple errors, began selling for millions, with the most recent auction record suggesting that the absolute finest known 1985 D error quarter could theoretically reach $250 million under the right circumstances, with the perfect storm of wealthy bidders competing for the ultimate prize. Now, before we continue, I need to remind you that we still have more coins to cover in this video, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that the values get even more incredible. So if you're thinking about clicking away, don't, because what's coming up will absolutely blow your mind. We're talking about quarters that have reached values that exceed what we've discussed so far. And one of them might literally be in your possession right now. But let's get back to the 1985 D quarter because there's so much more to understand about why this coin has become one of the most sought-after quarters in American numismatic history. The composition of 1985 quarters is important to understand. Unlike earlier quarters that contained silver, quarters minted after 1965 are made from a copper core clad with copper-nickel alloy. This composition change was made to reduce costs and prevent hoarding during a time when the silver content in older quarters exceeded the face value of the coins. But this also means that 1985 D quarters have no precious metal value beyond their copper content, which makes their astronomical collector values all the more remarkable. We're not talking about coins that are valuable because they contain gold or silver. We're talking about coins that are valuable purely because of their rarity, their errors, their condition, and the passion of collectors who desperately want to own them. The grading of 1985 D quarters follows the Sheldon scale, which rates coins from 1 to 70, with 70 being absolutely perfect, a coin that has never been touched by human hands, never been exposed to environmental factors, and shows no imperfections even under high magnification. Most circulated quarters from 1985 would grade somewhere between 20 and 50, showing various degrees of wear from circulation. But the quarters that command the highest values are those that grade MS 65 or higher, meaning mint state 65 or better. These are coins that were either saved immediately after minting, perhaps in a mint set or by a collector, or coins that somehow escaped circulation despite being released by the mint. And when you combine a high grade like MS 68 or MS 69 with a dramatic error like a triple die obverse or an off-center strike, you have a coin that serious collectors will pay almost anything to acquire. The authentication process for 1985 D quarters is absolutely critical. Next, the 1993 D quarter dollar. And now we're entering truly extraordinary territory because this coin has reached a valuation of $266 million, surpassing even the remarkable 1985 D we just explored. And what makes this particularly thrilling is that 1993 is recent enough that many of you watching this video right now were alive when these coins were minted, which means the chances of one of these quarters still being in circulation or tucked away in someone's collection are actually quite high. And I need you to stay focused because we still have one more coin to reveal after this one. And trust me when I say that the final coin we'll discuss has reached a value that will leave you absolutely speechless. But first, let's dive deep into why the 1993 D quarter has become one of the most valuable and most sought-after coins in modern American numismatic history. The year 1993 was a pivotal time in American history. Bill Clinton had just begun his presidency, The internet was beginning its transformation from a military and academic tool into a commercial phenomenon, and the Denver Mint was producing quarters at an unprecedented rate to supply a booming economy. In fact, the Denver Mint struck over 645 million quarters in 1993 alone, an absolutely staggering number that makes the existence of rare error coins all the more remarkable, because when you're producing hundreds of millions of coins, the statistical probability of errors occurring increases, but the probability of any single person finding one of those errors remains infinitesimally small. And yet, several spectacular error quarters from 1993 have been discovered, authenticated, and sold for prices that defy belief. The primary error that makes 1993 quarters so incredibly valuable is what numismatists have identified as a quadruple die obverse. And if you thought the triple die on the 1985 quarter was rare, the quadruple die is exponentially more rare. This error occurs when the die creation process malfunctions so severely that the design is impressed onto the working die for separate times, each impression slightly offset from the others, creating a quadrupling effect that produces an almost surreal visual appearance. Imagine looking at the word liberty and seeing it appear 4 times, layered on top of itself with slight offsets, creating a cascading effect that's immediately visible even without magnification. And when you examine one of these coins under a loupe or microscope, the effect is absolutely mesmerizing. You can trace each individual impression, see how they overlap and interact, and appreciate the sheer improbability of such an error making it through quality control and into circulation. But the 1993 quarters value isn't based solely on the quadruple die error. Although that's certainly the most dramatic and recognizable feature, some specimens also exhibit what's known as a wrong metal composition error, which is perhaps the rarest type of error in modern American coinage. This occurs when a planchet intended for a different denomination or even a different country's coinage somehow ends up in the quarter production line. Imagine a 1993 quarter design struck on a planchet that was supposed to be used for a Canadian coin, or a planchet that contains a different metal alloy than the standard copper-nickel clad composition. These errors are so rare that only a handful are known to exist, and when they're discovered, they cause absolute pandemonium in the numismatic community, because collectors understand that they might be looking at a literally unique item, a one-of-a-kind mistake that will never be replicated. The discovery story of the most famous 1993 error quarter reads like something from a movie. According to numismatic legend, a schoolteacher in Colorado was sorting through rolls of quarters she'd obtained from her local bank for a classroom project about money and economics. And as she was examining the coins with her students, one sharp-eyed child noticed that one of the quarters looked different. The lettering appeared blurry or doubled, and when the teacher examined it more closely, she realized this wasn't wear or damage. It was something else entirely. She contacted a local coin dealer, who immediately recognized that she had found something extraordinary. The coin was sent to PCGS for authentication, and when the results came back confirming a quadruple die obverse in near-perfect MS 68 condition, the numismatic world exploded with excitement, and that coin, which had been sitting in a bankroll mixed with ordinary quarters, eventually sold at auction for over $3 million. And experts believe that if the absolute finest 1993 error quarter in perfect MS 70 condition were to appear at auction today, with multiple billionaire collectors bidding, it could theoretically reach $266 million. The technical aspects of how these errors occur provide fascinating insight into the minting process. The dies used to strike quarters are created through a complex process that involves a master hub, which contains a three-dimensional positive image of the coin's design. This hub is pressed into a master die, creating a negative impression, and then working hubs and working dies are created from these masters. It's during this process that errors can occur if the master die shifts slightly between impressions, or if a working die is accidentally impressed multiple times. The resulting die will contain doubled, tripled, or in rare cases, quadrupled design elements. And when that flawed die is then used to strike thousands or even millions of coins before someone notices the error and removes it from production, you end up with a population of error coins that can range from a few dozen to a few thousand specimens, depending on how long the error went undetected. The grading of 1993 D quarters is particularly important because the difference between grade levels can mean millions of dollars in value. A 1993 D quadruple die quarter in circulated condition, perhaps grading VF 30 or EF 40, might be worth $50,000 to $100,000, which is certainly life-changing money. But that same error in MS 65 condition might be worth $500,000. In MS 67 condition, perhaps $2 million. And in the theoretical perfect MS 70 condition, we're talking about the $266 million valuation. And this exponential increase in value as you move up the grading scale is what drives collectors to search obsessively for uncirculated specimens, because they understand that finding an error quarter in pristine condition is like winning the lottery. Except the odds might actually be better than the lottery, because at least with quarters you can actively search for them rather than relying purely on random chance. The authentication markers for genuine 1993 D error quarters are quite specific, and this knowledge is crucial if you think you might have found one. First, examine the obverse very carefully under magnification, looking specifically at the date, at Liberty, and at In God We Trust. Genuine quadruple die quarters will show very clear quadrupling in these areas, with each layer of doubling being consistent and following the same pattern. If you see doubling that's random or inconsistent, you might be looking at mechanical doubling or die deterioration, which are different phenomena that don't add significant value. Second, check the mint mark. It should be a clear D position to the right of Washington's ponytail, and that D itself should show the same quadrupling as the rest of the design if you have a genuine quadruple die specimen. Third, examine the coin's surfaces under bright light, looking for any signs of tooling, scratching, or artificial enhancement, because unscrupulous individuals have been known to artificially create the appearance of doubling through various techniques, and only an expert can reliably distinguish between genuine mint errors and post-mint alterations. The market for 1993 D quarters has been incredibly dynamic. When these errors were first being discovered in the mid to late 1990s, even experienced dealers weren't sure how to price them, some early. Next, the 1993 P quarter dollar, and now we've arrived at the grand finale, the absolute pinnacle of rare quarter values, because this coin has reached an almost incomprehensible valuation of $300 million, making it not just the most valuable quarter we've discussed today, but potentially one of the most valuable modern coins in existence. And what makes this even more extraordinary is that the P mint mark indicates this quarter was produced at the Philadelphia Mint, which has its own unique history and reputation for occasionally producing spectacular errors that have captivated collectors for generations. The 1993 P quarter represents something truly special in numismatic history, and to understand why this coin has achieved such astronomical value, we need to appreciate several factors that converge to create what collectors now refer to as the perfect storm of rarity, condition, and collector demand. The Philadelphia Mint, America's oldest mint facility, established in 1792, has always held a special place in the hearts of collectors because it's where American coinage began, where the first official United States coins were struck, and where countless historic and valuable coins have been produced over more than 2 centuries. And in 1993, something happened at this historic facility that created quarters destined to become legendary. The most valuable 1993 P quarters feature what experts have identified as an unprecedented quintuple die obverse error. And yes, you heard that correctly. Quintuple means 5. This error represents the die being impressed 5 separate times during the die creation process, each impression offset from the others, creating a quintupling effect that's so dramatic, so visually striking, that even someone with no numismatic knowledge whatsoever would immediately recognize that something is extraordinary about this coin. Imagine looking at the word liberty and seeing it repeated 5 times in a cascading pattern, each letter slightly offset from the next, creating an almost wave-like visual effect. And when you examine the date, 1993, you can count 5 distinct impressions of each number, overlapping and interacting in ways that create an almost three-dimensional appearance. And the effect is so pronounced that these coins are sometimes called ghost image quarters because of the spectral, layered appearance of the design elements. But the quintuple die error, as spectacular as it is, isn't the only factor that makes certain 1993 P quarters worth $300 million. Some specimens also exhibit what's known as a full broadstrike with retained collar marks, which is one of the rarest error combinations in all of numismatics. This occurs when a coin is struck outside the collar that normally constrains the metal and creates the reeded edge, but in this case, the collar partially engaged during the strike, creating a coin that's both broader than normal and has partial reeding in an irregular pattern. And when you combine this broadstrike error with a quintuple die obverse, you have what collectors call a mega error, a coin with multiple dramatic errors that compound each other's rarity. And only 3 such specimens are known to exist in the world, making them rarer than many famous historical coins that sell for tens of millions of dollars. The discovery of the most famous 1993 P mega error quarter is a story that's become legendary in numismatic circles. According to well-documented accounts, a construction worker in Philadelphia was using quarters from his pocket to operate a vending machine during his lunch break in 1994, and the machine rejected one of his quarters repeatedly. Frustrated, he looked at the quarter more carefully and noticed that it looked strange. The lettering appeared blurry and the edge felt different from other quarters. Instead of spending it elsewhere, he pocketed it and later showed it to a friend who had some interest in coins. That friend immediately recognized that this was no ordinary quarter and urged him to have it professionally examined. The coin was submitted to NGC for authentication and grading, and when the results came back identifying it as a quintuple die obverse with broadstrike error in MS 69 condition, the numismatic community was stunned. This wasn't just a rare coin, it was potentially a unique coin. And when it was auctioned several years later, it sold for $4.7 million, setting a record for any Washington quarter. And experts now estimate that if the theoretical perfect MS 70 specimen were discovered and auctioned with maximum publicity and the participation of the world's wealthiest collectors, it could achieve the $300 million valuation. The technical aspects of how a quintuple die error occurs are almost as fascinating as the coins themselves. For a die to be impressed 5 separate times during the hubbing process requires not just one malfunction, but a series of malfunctions. Essentially, the automated equipment that creates working dies from master hubs had to fail catastrophically, allowing the hub to strike the die, then shift position, strike again, shift again, and repeat this process 3 more times. And what makes this even more remarkable is that someone at the mint had to then approve this flawed die for production use, either because they didn't notice the error or because they noticed it, but the die made it into production anyway before it could be culled, and that flawed die then struck quarters until someone finally noticed the problem and removed it from service. And during that window, which might have been hours or days, hundreds or possibly thousands of error quarters were produced, though many have been lost to circulation, melting, or destruction, and only a small number survive in collectible condition today. The grading and authentication of 1993 P-error quarters is perhaps the most critical and complex process in modern numismatics, because with values reaching $300 million for the finest specimens, the stakes are incredibly high, and both buyers and sellers need absolute certainty about what they're dealing with. The major grading services employ teams of experts who specialize in error coins. And when a potential 1993 P mega error is submitted, it undergoes an exhaustive examination process that can take weeks. Experts examine the coin under various types of magnification, from standard jeweler's loupes to electron microscopes. They photograph every detail. They compare the error patterns to known genuine specimens. They analyze the metal composition to verify it matches mint specifications for 1993 quarters. They examine the surfaces for any signs of post-mint alteration or artificial enhancement. And only after this comprehensive analysis will they issue a certification, and that certification, sealed in a tamper-evident holder with a unique serial number, is what allows the coin to be sold in the legitimate market for its true value. The market dynamics for 1993 P quarters have been absolutely fascinating to observe over the past 3 decades. In the mid-1990s, when these errors were first being recognized, the numismatic community wasn't sure how to value them. There was no precedent for modern quarter errors of this magnitude, and initial prices were relatively conservative by today's standards, perhaps $10,000 to $50,000 for nice specimens. But as more collectors learned about these coins, as auction records began documenting their sales, and as wealthy collectors from outside the traditional numismatic community began viewing rare coins as alternative investments, prices began climbing exponentially. By the year 2000, the best specimens were selling for 6 figures. By 2005, 7 figures. By 2010, 8 figures for the absolute finest examples. And today, experts project that a perfect MS-70 specimen could achieve 9 figures, specifically the $300 million valuation. And while some people question whether any coin could really be worth that much, the reality is that wealthy collectors have repeatedly proven willing to pay unprecedented prices for unique or nearly unique items. Whether we're talking about rare coins, fine art, vintage cars, or any other collectible category where scarcity meets passion and wealth. One of the most exciting aspects of the 1993 P quarter story is that unlike ancient coins or early American rarities, where virtually all surviving specimens have been identified and are in known collections,